Chances are, you might have heard of a man named James Cameron. It's hard not to, because this man has directed some of the highest grossing movies of all time. But before he did so, he was an unknown person until he directed a low-budget movie called The Terminator. The Terminator has been regarded as a science fiction classic even 30 years after its release, and has had various sequels. Since the new Terminator movie is coming out now, I think it's time to review the Terminator movies. In the future, a supercomputer named Skynet determines the fate of humanity in a microsecond and attempts to wipe out all humanity on Earth. Humans win the war, but Skynet sends back a Terminator, played by Arnold Schwarzenegger, to kill off Sarah Connor, played by Linda Hamilton, because she will be the mother of the leader of the human resistance known as John Connor. The resistance sends back one of their own to protect Sarah Connor named Kyle Reese, played by Michael Biehn. I'm just going to be blunt and say that this is one of the best science fiction movies ever made. The story itself is grand. Although I did hear that it's loosely based off an Outer Limits episode, the story in this movie comes off as more of its own premise. In fact, the characters are a little symbolic in their own way. Sarah Connor is like the Virgin Mary who will give birth to the savior of mankind, Kyle Reese is like Joseph, and the Terminator is a lot like King Herod, who wants the child slain. It's also ironic that Jesus Christ and John Connor have the same initials, JC. Besides how symbolic they are, I think they're great characters in their own right. I like the arc that Sarah Connor goes through. She's an average woman that's not very confident or competent.
I mean, am I tough? Organized? I can't even balance my checkbook.
But through time, she gets protected and trained by Kyle Reese to become the soldier that will be able to raise the leader of humanity. Kyle Reese is a very cool character. I like how he's very rugged around the edges, quick on his feet at surviving, and he has one thing that the Terminator doesn't have: humanity.
I came across time for you, Sarah. I love you.
Speaking of, the title character, aka the Terminator, is one of the best villains, if not one of the most iconic movie characters of all time. I love how he looks around like a security camera and reloads without looking at his gun. In addition, he can operate a vehicle and mimic someone's voice.
This is 1L19, westbound and Olympic approaching Overland.
Then of course is his famous quote.
I'll be back.
Originally, he was supposed to say, "I'll come back." Personally, I'm glad they got that line wrong. In addition, I can't see any other actor playing the Terminator besides Arnold Schwarzenegger. Originally, James Cameron wanted O.J. Simpson to play the Terminator, but the studio thought that no one would be convinced that O.J. Simpson was a killer. Oh, the irony. Besides the characters, the directing is A grade. Seeing the Terminator for the first time always gives me chills because we see the menacing character looking over the unexpected city. My favorite scene is probably the club scene, which everything, including the music, slows down to show how tense things are becoming and in a way the hammer is coming down. Even the special effects are great too. Well, most of them. For a movie that nowadays would cost $15 million to make, they did a grand job of making the best they could with it. Seeing the full reveal of the Terminator for the first time is very satisfying, and the design of the T-800 is timeless. Finally, you gotta love that music by Brad Fiedel, who also worked on the soundtrack to Fright Night a year after. Well, so far, you can tell that I really like this one. In fact, this is the movie that got me into trying to make movies and wanting to be in the movie industry someday. So this one has my eternal thanks. I give The Terminator 4 stars out of 4. So, going to the next decade, James Cameron returned to the franchise with Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Apparently, Skynet sent back another Terminator to kill John Connor just in case the first one failed. In an interesting twist, the Resistance sends back a Terminator to protect John Connor, making the T-800 a good guy this time. As much as I am for a twist, I kinda prefer the Terminator as a villain and how Kyle Reese described him.
It can't be bargained with. It can't be reasoned with. It doesn't feel pity or remorse or fear, and it absolutely will not stop, ever, until you are dead.
In addition, seeing the Terminator not being able to kill anyone kinda feels like they neutered him a little. Also, there's no point of him wearing sunglasses. In the first one, he did so to cover his exposed eye. I think the only plot hole I can think of is that how can it take place in 1991, and if John Connor was born in 1985, shouldn't John Connor be about 6 years old? But that's all my nitpicking because this movie is great. I love seeing Sarah Connor again. I love how she's jaded, but also has a soft quality to herself about her love for Kyle Reese and their son John. The new villain this time is the T-1000, played by Robert Patrick. He's different because he's a Terminator made completely liquid and can shapeshift. He is an interesting villain, especially for how he showcases some of the best CGI of the 1990s. Speaking of, the effects are amazing. Like Jurassic Park, this movie combines practical effects while being very careful with the use of CGI. One of my favorite action scenes is this chase scene because it's all real stunt work and adds to the intensity of it. The opening shot is cool, and a friend of mine who's big into movies said that this prologue scene was at least 20 years ahead of its time. One of my favorite scenes is when John Connor is caught in the crosshairs of the Terminator and the T-1000. The biker bar scene is really good too. I remember watching this scene many times growing up and never gets old. Besides its action, the movie does have good character development and drama. I like the scenes between the Terminator and John. John is kinda like his teacher for being more of a human, which leads to some pretty funny scenes.
That's good. Maybe you could practice in front of a mirror or something.
In addition, the Terminator also plays like a father figure in which John lacks that of. Edward Furlong, who plays John Connor, is pretty good for a child actor and for this being his first movie. Overall, Terminator 2 Judgment Day is not better than the first one, but it's one of the best sequels of all time and ended the franchise on a grand note. I give Terminator 2 Judgment Day 3.5 stars out of 4. So, years went by as the Terminator franchise was beloved by all, until Hollywood got greedy. Over a decade later, it was announced that a third Terminator movie was gonna happen. People were excited, but little did they know that it was gonna be special in a bad way. In the present day, a Terminator known as the TX, played by Christina Loken, is on a mission to kill John Connor and anyone who will be his lieutenants in the future. The Terminator is sent back in time to protect John Connor and his love interest Kate, played by Claire Danes. Basically, Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines has nothing new going on. It's the same rehashed story from the previous one with two Terminators, one to kill, one to protect. I have to be frank, this movie is just flat out awful. This movie is solely responsible for ruining the Terminator franchise. The first two were fine on their own, and having this one existing just messed everything up. It's like the equivalent of the first two being grand paintings and the third one just scribbling all over with crayons and hand paint. Remember what the saying was in the first one?
I can't help you with what you must soon face, except to say that the future is not set.
Well, this time the future is set in stone and you can't do anything about it, which is a huge contradiction to this franchise's mythos. The Terminator in this one is definitely more cold and not as likable as he was in the last movie. Sure, the Terminator is a cold killer, but he is a protector this time and he didn't feel like one most of the time. I'm just gonna point out that Nick Stahl as John Connor is easily one of the worst casting decisions of all time. He looks nothing like John Connor or the older one from the second one. Although he does look a lot like his father Kyle Reese, they should have casted him as that character in Terminator Genisys, but we'll get to that one eventually. John Connor in the last one was a bit of a prick, but he was tough and a quick learner. But John Connor in this one is a textbook definition of a loser and not very likable in any moment of this whole entire movie. The TX was interesting because she's a mix of the T-800 and the T-1000. She has a plasma gun, a flamethrower, can hotwire a car, and get a boob job? Yeah, having your boobs be able to go but cup size is handy for taking down your target, I guess. Aside from that, the effects are not half bad, but the directing is mediocre like this movie. This is one of those movies that should have never happened, and it's easily one of the worst sequels of all time. If I ever got my own Terminator, I would send one back in time to make sure this movie never even happened. In fact, I would also have the Terminator say this to the people who thought that this movie was a good idea.
Fuck you, asshole.
In addition, Batman the Animated Series predicted that this movie was gonna be bad.
I hate sequels. Do it.
I give Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines 1 star out of 4. So, stay tuned to part 2 where I talk about Terminator Salvation and Terminator Genisys. This scene is very symbolic for how the media forces us to listen to and accept Taylor Swift.